You're listening to The Real Well Show with Kathy Fettke, the real estate investor's resource.
The housing market is red hot. The median home price rose 13% year over year. Active listings fell 28% to an all-time low. Sales of new homes accelerated by 4.8% in August to an annual rate of 1 million units. That's the highest since 2006. New home inventory fell to a 3.3-month level, the shortest period going back to 1963. What is going on and will it last? I'm Kathy Fettke and welcome to The Real Well Show. Well, who better to fill us in than Robert Dietz, the chief economist for the National Association of Home Builders, where his responsibilities include forecasts of housing and economic trends, survey research, and home building industry and policy analysis. And he's here with us on The Real Well Show. So Robert, welcome.
Great. It's good joining you today.
It's really great to have you here because I have so many questions. For one, housing has really rebounded. It looks like a V-shaped recovery. What are your thoughts on that? Is it going to be a W or a V?
I'm sticking with a V. I mean, if you go back to March and April, we were definitely concerned about home prices, the outlook for home building. But I think the combination of low interest rates, admittedly a recovering economy, but a real focus on home and the importance of single-family housing has led to a lot of strength in housing demand. And we've seen that in mortgage application data, and we've certainly seen it in new home sales.
Yeah, it's just incredible, and it seems obvious. Many people are thinking they'd like to be in a nice, clean, new home and get out of the cities that seem to be not the safest places or the cleanest places to live these days. So let me ask you, how long do you think this will last? Let's just talk about the rest of 2020. You think it'll continue at this pace?
Maybe not at this pace, but we think housing demand is going to be solid. And the pickup that we've seen in home building, certainly it looks like it's going to continue. Home builder confidence, which is something we measure here at the National Association of Home Builders on a monthly basis, is actually now at a 35-year high. And that's due to higher traffic numbers. I think the low interest rates, which are going to continue for the next couple of years, thanks to policy actions of the Federal Reserve, will sustain the strength that we've seen in home demand. And really the challenge that we have right now is the challenge that's been in the marketplace for the last 4 or 5 years, which is a lack of inventory. It's not just the resale inventory that's really tight right now. Existing home inventory is only about 3 months supply nationwide, but for new home inventory, it's about a 3.3-month supply, and increasingly builders are selling homes that haven't even started construction yet.
Yeah, as a builder myself, and we syndicate and have residential communities all over the country, it's so difficult to be able to forecast because sometimes it's 3, 5, or 10 years down the road before you can actually build anything. But what we're finding is that, as you know, material costs are going up, specifically lumber. That's going to drive prices up further. At what point does it become unaffordable?
Well, in some cases, we're actually there right now. And it's not a kind of an either or, as you know, as those prices go up, you price out certain buyers from the market. And lumber is a good example of that. Now, lumber has gone up in a sense as a sign of strength that we've seen in housing. Lumber prices are up more than 170% since mid-April. There's some signs that maybe those prices are beginning to level off. We could see some declines, but right now they're adding probably about $16,000 to a typical new home build. And we estimate that for every $1,000 you add to a newly built home price, you're probably pricing out about 159,000 home buyers nationwide. So it begins to crowd things out. I think right now, though, that the challenge in the market is really kind of delays. It's taking longer to get some of those lumber. It's taking longer to get building materials and other kinds of appliances. And what we're seeing are the legacy effects of some of the disruptions we have in supply chains. So, from a customer perspective, yes, new construction is an option, particularly if you're moving to those lower density markets and away from the urban areas, but you're going to have to be patient because things may take longer and some of the costs are going up.
So is it COVID-related delays or is it, something else, something political?
It's a combination of factors. I do think, as an economist, we like to say that trade is important, and I think trade does tend to lower costs and grow economies, and so trade is disrupted, and that is having an effect. And so things like lighting fixtures and plumbing fixtures that we imported from overseas, those supply chains are kind of moved around. On lumber, it's complicated. Some of it is COVID issues. There's not enough workforce to step up domestic production of lumber. That's complicated by the fact that we have a 20% tariff on Canadian softwood lumber. But overall, the supply side of the market is going to have to repair like the rest of the economy, and that includes, by the way, bringing workers back into the industry. We've had a supply or a skilled labor shortage in the industry for quite some time. We lost a number of jobs in March and April as the economy downshifted, but I think in the next 2 or 3 months, due to rehiring, residential construction will actually post a gain in terms of the number of jobs that we have on a year-over-year basis. So, the supply chain, the labor supply, making sure that land and lots are available to build on, all those factors really determine how much housing we can supply in a given year.
So, what do you do about the skilled labor problem? I mean, we've been talking about that for 10 years now. It seems like an incredible opportunity to provide that kind of training, especially now that there's a lot of people looking for work. What kind of, where do you get that kind of training?
That's exactly right. And so, we need to take advantage to bring people in the industry. Just as an example, we did some analysis over the last couple of weeks that only 10% of the construction labor force consists of women. And it's only 3% of the occupation of construction actually, swinging hammers and doing the work. So whether it's recruiting population groups that we haven't done a particularly good job of the last few years, or taking advantage of the fact that unemployment is now elevated for the rest of the economy, it's local home builders associations, state associations, the Home Builders Institute, working with trade schools and community colleges to bring people into the industry. And there's another source, by the way, that's also available. While housing's a bright spot, non-residential construction is probably going to suffer a period of economic weakness for a number of years. So we can bring some of those workers into the industry. And then, by the way, while we're recruiting people, we need to find ways to build more with less. We've got to increase productivity in the sector. And so that means training. And, for someone coming into the industry for the first time, it could take about 18 months to really kind of bring them up to a kind of that skilled position. And this is all just trying to solve what we've called the middle skills crisis. And it's going to take years. It's a slow process, but we get yard by yard and make things better as we go along.
Yeah, there was a builder in Colorado, I think, that was offering an academy if people would come I don't know if they had to pay. I think maybe they got paid, maybe they didn't get paid, but they were trained, on the job training. I have a close. One of my daughter's close friends is 24 and he really wants to be in the industry. And it's like he doesn't really know what to do. And when he worked for a home builder, he just got stuck digging ditches and that wasn't what he was trying to learn. So that to me seems like an incredible opportunity to open some kind of school like that, especially if a builder could do that.
And you are seeing some local associations. I think you may be referring to some of the activities that took place in like Colorado Springs.
Mm-hmm.
There's different efforts underway. And I think really the industry needs to partner with what I think is the hidden gem of the U.S. education system, which is the community college system. Finding ways to train people that way and then bring them into the sector, because construction is an industry that pays above median wages. And it's a great place after a number of years of building your skills to launch your own business. So you could be working as an independent contractor and then 10 years own your own framing crew or plumbing company. And so it's a great kind of place to get started for small business.
So knowing that costs are going up and it will get to a point of lack of affordability, do you see any builders really coming out with product that is more affordable with the use of technology, with the, we're seeing, I mean, are you seeing anybody being more creative in that space?
The creativity has been turned on. Whether it's going to happen at scale to really affect the housing affordability crisis that we have, I think is another issue. So there's a lot of different ways that have been speculated in terms of trying to find new ways to build, to bend the cost curve and provide that particularly entry level housing that we really need. So examples that have been thrown out there include modular construction, panelized construction. This is where you're building either some or almost the entire house in a factory. The share of those kinds of activities is pretty small. It's only about 3% of construction, and there's a
Hmm.
lot of kind of maybe more hype than hope. I think the share is going to grow, but the technology is really not quite there yet to do this kind of activity at scale. I think ultimately, getting productivity gains in the sector is really a function of training people and bringing them in the sector. And then we also have to reduce the regulatory costs associated with developing land and undertaking construction activities. That's really kind of the low-hanging fruit when it comes to bending the cost curve.
And what are the chances of that? I'm in California.
Yeah, well, so for a typical newly built home, about a quarter of the price at the end of the day are various kinds of regulatory costs that get built into the system, and two-thirds of that total is actually at the land stage. So California is famous or infamous for having high permit fees and impact fees and other factors that tend to drive things up. So, a common question I get when I talk to local policymakers is, why aren't builders building more entry-level $200,000 or $150,000 newly built homes? Well, when the permit fee can be $100,000, it's
Right.
difficult to build a $200,000 home, and that really is the challenge. And we kind of touched on it earlier, but there is this suburban shift taking place as a result of the virus.
Mhm.
We know the virus is accelerating a lot of economic trends that were already in place. And I think one of the things that we're going to see is that buyers who now maybe have a little more flexibility to travel to a new market are going to be able to purchase a home in a lower cost, which ultimately, in many cases, means a lower regulatory burden environment when it comes to construction and development.
Yeah, and something that people really just don't think enough about, I think, is the utilities. I mean, you could build houses, but you need water, you need electricity. I remember when we first started building and investing in Texas, people were like, "Oh my gosh, you'll never make money there. There's nothing but land." But there's there's more to it than land, right?
Right.
So I think Colorado has big issues on that. Like land can be cheap, but but you don't get the water rights. So where is that more of a problem than not?
Well, the highest regulatory environments are often the coastal markets. And so it's correlated with those land prices, the places where land's most expensive. And some of that higher price land is because people want to live in those kinds of environments. But it's also a function of those tend to be the markets that tend to have the higher impact fees, the higher challenges, the longer land development cycles where land could take 10 years before it can actually be brought to be built on. So I think one of the things that we're seeing right now is this kind of shift taking place, and I'll give you a good example of it. For a while, population growth in the Midwest has been flat, and one of the things that we've seen this year, coming out of the virus-related recession, is gains in home construction in places like Columbus, Indianapolis, Kansas City. These are lower regulatory cost environments, and then they join their peers in southern markets that have seen growth already, North Carolina, Florida, Texas, as places where we see gains this year. The places where things are not growing as quickly, in fact, posting negative growth rates, unfortunately does include some of the California markets that are down on a year-to-date basis. And I think it's a cost consideration. And ultimately, home buyers will vote with their feet and
Yeah.
find places where they can live more affordably.
Yeah, we stopped building in California for that reason. Like you just said, it was $135,000 in just in fees. And then we just went 3 hours away to Reno, and I think it was 15,000 or something. It's a huge difference,
And
but that's
Reno is one
changing
of
too.
those markets. Yeah, Reno is one of those markets this year has got a lot of growth, and it's for just that reason.
Yeah, and when more builders come and when the city council starts to pay attention, then all of a sudden there's more regulation. You got to get in there early. All right, now what areas would you say maybe are on the cusp of being overbuilt, if any?
Well, so I don't know if overbuilt's necessarily the right word, but certainly the multifamily sector right now has got weakness. There's concerns about people paying the rent, and thus far, I think the economy's done better, and renters have done better than expected in terms of being able to pay that rent. But we are seeing rising vacancy rates. You're seeing additional use of rent concessions. And I think, that urban suburban story is part of it. So, to the extent that if you've got a metro market and it had a lot of apartment construction over the last 2 to 3 years, and some of that apartment, typical apartment can take 18 months to build out, there might be too much inventory in the pipeline for some of those places. So I think you got to be careful with high-rise multifamily, but it's not the entire rental market. Low-rise multifamily, garden-style apartments that have a door directly to the outside, so you don't have to take an elevator, that's going to be in demand. And then the single-family rental market is kind of an interesting blend between single-family for sale and multifamily. There's a lot of people right now that want the yard, they want the suburban aesthetic, but they can't afford to buy a single family home. And so whether it's mom and pop investors who are operating a single family home, or in some cases, builders who are doing single family built for rent, that's an interesting market, which although small, it's only about 4% of construction, we think is going to have some growth here over the next couple of years, because it seems to be that people want more space. They're working at home, they're studying at home, they're exercising at home, and they're going to seek out places where they can gain it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people, I don't think this pain is going to go away anytime soon of being locked in your apartment or being in a high rise, very expensive condo where you can't use any of the amenities, or being in a city like New York City where the whole point is going out and being around people, being at fancy restaurants and entertainment, and you can't do that. So you're just going to have to entertain yourself at home, and you need more space. Let's go back to multifamily. Which markets would you say are at more risk of being overbuilt? Because I know there's a lot of new units coming online just over the next 12 months.
Yeah, I think places where you've seen a lot of growth with respect to apartment construction, markets where multifamily activity has been particularly hot. A good example would be like Austin. Some of that is going to slow down because, a market like Austin that depended a lot on younger individuals moving into those apartments, that's where a lot of the unemployment is concentrated. And then, like I said, I think structurally it would be markets that depend a lot on high-rise development. The two that have obviously been cited by a lot of people are New York and San Francisco. You're seeing whether it's moving truck data, rent data, vacancy rate data. Those are places where apartments moving through the pipeline are going to face higher vacancy rates until we get a vaccine. And then that becomes the next economic debate, which is how much of this change is going to persist, or how much of it is going to roll back when we get back to something normal, which could happen next summer. I think some of these changes, by the way, will persist. There's a ratchet effect. And the best example of that is working from home. Pretty good government data right now indicates about a quarter of workers are working from home. And before the virus crisis, it was probably about 4 or 5%. Now, not all of those people are going to continue to work from home, but even if a half or a third of them do, it does mean a change in geography. And I think, if you're classifying market by market, it's the higher density, higher cost markets that are in trouble. And it's the lower density, lower cost markets that can really see some growth because people will have more freedom to either live a little further out from the urban core, or in some cases, live somewhere else entirely if they're working entirely remotely.
Absolutely. We have a subdivision we're building in just outside of Bozeman, Montana. And when we purchased the land, it was so cheap, but it was risky. The main point was, well, there's no other builders there, so at least we have no competition. Well, you wouldn't believe, I mean, you would believe, we are sold out. I mean, just phase one, we hadn't even broken ground, and there was a wait list because you could be 45 minutes from some of the best skiing in the world. You've got some of the best fishing, best hiking, mountain trails, and you can get your job done. And you can, if you need to go into the office, well, you can fly there for 1 or 2 days. But that's why our Reno properties, I think, are going to do really well and have been selling quickly, because you can live in Reno and be near Tahoe, but if you need to go into San Francisco for a day, it's not that far.
And a good example of that, the experience of Boise, Idaho, over the last 10 years has just been incredible in terms of the amount of growth that's taken place. So the mountain states, I think, are winning. It's some of the more expensive coastal markets where the virus is a 1-2 punch. They already faced housing affordability challenges because of these regulatory costs. And then the virus itself, it does appear to have a larger effect on high density markets.
Now, I worked in the news media business for years, and I know that if it bleeds, it leads. We got to always have those negative headlines to get people's attention. And we've seen lately the headlines of all these foreclosures coming because of forbearances. And I know John Burns disagrees with that, and a few other people that I listen to who track the data. It's my opinion that they're just going to have loan modifications, not a bunch of foreclosures when people can't make the payment, because of course the lack of payment was not really due to a fault of their own. This was a very unusual time. I mean, would you agree? Do you think we're going to see a flood of foreclosures over the next year?
I think it's gonna be higher than it was in 2019, but it's not going to be a flood. And in fact, if you look at the Mortgage Bankers Association's data on some of these things, I think about half the people that applied for forbearance did so in March and April, mostly as insurance policy. And so, yes, there's going to be some elevated risk, but some of the forecasts that we saw back in the spring of home price declines, and it was people kind of having echoes of the Great Recession. Those are not going to turn out. We are inventory starved in the market. I think lenders are going to work with those who do have long-term unemployment. But if you're looking at the primary way or the primary way to forecast whether people are going to pay their mortgages is the unemployment rate. And we're already down to 8.4% off of probably a top rate of 16%. The labor market continues to improve, and so I'm fairly positive in terms of the ability to pay mortgages. A little more concerned about some of the rent issues as we go into the winter.
Tell me more about that.
Well, so some of the numbers I think are exaggerated. I mean, you've probably seen the headlines about the idea of 40 million people.
Yeah.
Those numbers are off by probably a decimal point, right?
Yeah.
If you look at some census data, if you look at some of the survey data, it's not 40 million. It's in the single digit millions of people who are at risk. There is going to be some impact there for multifamily residential. Some people have been living off of the expanded unemployment insurance benefits. Those, by the way, caused some problems in the labor market, but they did provide some income support. We'll have to see what the future of emerging, I think, compromise coming on another stimulus bill that could help. But we still have unemployment, and it is concentrated among service workers, younger workers, and they're at risk of moving back home. But if as a contrast where we are now with, say, the Great Recession, it's the residential, non-residential flip. The concerns about rent, I think, are even more concentrated in the non-residential sector. So the ability of restaurant tenants to pay landlords, that's where the concern is in the economy. Housing, on the other hand, seems to be weathering this crisis fairly well.
Isn't that the truth? Yeah, I would not want to be owning a shopping center right now. Yeah, but you know what? Americans are creative, and they'll find something else to do with those buildings.
That's right. That's right. Maybe housing. I mean, that's one of the things that we were expecting to see already, that shopping malls were going to go out of business. A great place to build an urban village in some of these medium density type neighborhoods.
Yeah, I mean that's what it seems like. Like a lot of what has happened is just an acceleration of what was already happening. More working from home, more online shopping. So we just got there faster. And then the robots are coming, and that was the headline news for a while. Everyone's going to lose their jobs to robots and automation. And well, it turns out they lost their jobs to a pandemic instead, which brings us back full circle to, man, let's train these people on how to be in the construction world.
That's right.
Yeah. So if you were to buy a rental property, where would you buy it and what kind of asset class, or would you?
Well, yeah. So I think you need to choose your market carefully. If you're whatever kind of real estate investment you're going to be making, I think you need to be looking at places that have solid population growth trends. So, you're looking for a lower density type market. You're looking at a place that has a lot of momentum when it comes to population growth. And, a good example right now are states in the Southeast. So Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas. These are all places that will continue to have population growth. As a kind of a wild card, I will go back to the Midwest. I think we are going to see maybe kind of along this band of I-70 of some of these cities that are affordable but have a lot of critical mass when it comes to economic activity. And businesses and individuals are going to give them a second look. And again, it's places like Columbus, Ohio, that I think are set for a kind of a real leg up and jump in terms of growth. but it will come at the expense of places like San Francisco and New York.
And what do you think about Cincinnati? And that seems to be growing as well, which is a bit of a surprise, and Cleveland.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, so this is an area. Well, yeah, no, Cincinnati and Cleveland are good examples. You're looking for that kind of that medium-sized metropolitan area that has really good housing affordability conditions to try to attract Gen Xers and millennials from expensive coastal areas. And so we already saw the round of it over the last decade in the mountain states, as we were talking about. And I think the Midwest could now experience that kind of change. So that would be a good place to maybe take some risk and make those kinds of real estate investments. The places that are high risk, there's only a couple of them, but they just happen to be hyper dense in places where a lot of people live. And I've said it already, but New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles and probably Chicago are places that are going to have a market adjustment. And that's what markets do. They adjust given changing circumstances. I think the real risk in those places is that policymakers need to recognize that investment can flow where it has the highest rate of return. So if they further regulate or increase taxes, they're going to have real capital flight issues.
Absolutely. I mean, it just seems like there's a shortage of homes in places like Ohio where, we've heard up till now that people are leaving. So how could there be a shortage of homes? But it seems like one of the reasons would be that there just wasn't a profit center there to build new houses in Ohio because they're so cheap. Houses are so cheap already. How do you make a margin there? So that's just exacerbated the problem there. And I think, in my opinion, made it a great place to for rental property or to build if you can.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, Robert. Such a pleasure to have you here with us today on the Real Wealth Show. If you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about the National Association of Home Builders and how you serve builders.
Yeah. So NAHB, we're a trade association. We have local associations throughout the country and state associations. There's about 600 of them. We have 140,000 members, about a third of whom are builders and remodelers, and the other 2/3 are associate members that do financing and subcontracting and all kinds of work associated with residential construction. NAHB's, we're based in Washington, D.C., and I'm the chief economist here. I run a team of 12 economists. We do policy research, we do forecasting, survey research, just things to help our members grow their businesses, providing them market intelligence.
Well, sounds like an important place to sign up if you're planning on building. All right, wonderful. Well, thank you again so much for joining us here on the Real Wealth Show.
Great, thank you.
And thank you for joining me here on the Real Wealth Show. If you'd like a referral to a great builder in those markets that we just talked about on this show, who can help you buy brand new properties that are built specifically for rental, just go to realwealthshow.com. And once you join, it's free to join. You'll see a list of what we think will be the best performing real estate markets over the coming years. And we've got teams in each of those markets to help you with a full service rental property where they help you acquire the property, they help you screen tenants, and offer ongoing property management. Again, that's at realwealthshow.com. I'm Kathy Fettke, and thanks so much for joining me here today.